We are continuing our study in the narrative lectionary. This week reading is from Hebrews 4:14 through 5:10. In this bit of scripture, the author of Hebrews is really trying to point out how Jesus is a special kind of high priest. We've had high priests before. You know, he's writing this to the Hebrews, so he's writing it to Israelite believers. And they've experienced having a high priest their whole lives and for generations and generations before. And high priests sometimes were not that great, and other times were really amazing, and they understood the suffering of the people. But he starts with this argument and says, look, this Jesus guy, like, he's a high priest that understands your suffering. You know, this is a person who went to the cross, experienced the worst possible suffering we can even imagine. And so when you go to this high priest, Jesus, he gets it. He absolutely gets it. But he really starts to make this distinction and say, Jesus is not just the type of high priest that gets it, but Jesus is also the type of high priest that can get things done. See, at this time, the high priests, they were only able to go into the presence of God once a year, and their relationship was such that someone would tie a rope to their leg so that if they offended God while they were in the presence of God and died, that people could pull them out and bury their body appropriately. And Jesus is a different kind of high priest. Jesus is a high priest that has gone up to heaven and sits at the right hand with the Father. This is a different kind of high priest. And so the author is really establishing this. And the author has already talked about how Jesus, the high priest, was a man and also was fully God. And so he's playing on this tension of being fully man and fully God. Jesus is a high priest that gets it. Jesus is a high priest that can get things done. And Jesus is different than the high priest that we've had in the past. And goes on to really specify and say, look, I know that we've had high priests in the past that could understand suffering. Maybe they got it, but they didn't have access to God the way that Jesus does. But furthermore, they also had to wrestle with their own sin in the process of that. Sin that got in the way of their relationship with God, and sin that got in the way of their relationship with us. And Jesus doesn't have that problem. Jesus is a high priest that gets it, that can get things done, and doesn't have his own stuff in the way. And that maybe doesn't mean as much to us on the surface, but to the Israelites, that was huge. This was a whole new kind of high priest. To us, it means that we have an advocate. And maybe that's the best translation for us that have not grown up in the Jewish faith. We have an advocate sitting at the right hand of the Father who gets it no matter what you're going through, no matter what's going on. He gets you, understands what you're going through and what's happening, loves you, can get things done, and doesn't have to struggle with his own junk getting in the way. He's not too busy. He's not busy watching something on Netflix that he can't just put down. Like, have you ever had a pastor that you're working with them and you want them to work with you, but they're not showing up? They're busy. They've got things to do. Jesus is not that kind of high priest. Jesus is an advocate that's there for you and ready and available. I think this is a cool scripture. The longer I've stuck with it and the longer I've wrestled with it this week, the more I've really loved it. I hope you got something out of it. If you enjoy these, I would ask that you please like and subscribe to the channel. You can also check out the blog where I talk a little bit more about some of this stuff, monasticpastor.com.